the distance formula for 2 points. We looked at how we could use the Pythagorean theorem if the points are on a graph. When we have 2 points, we're going to have an xy coordinate and another xy coordinate. So the first thing, before we look at the formula, you might notice first that there's an x1 and an x2. How do we get that, and what do those mean? Well, the 1 comes from simply saying the first point. And you could use any one first. I could use that one as the first point, or I can use this one as the first point. The answers will come out the same. So here's my first point. So that 1 next to each number or each variable would mean the first x, first y. The x and y of the first point. Then, on our second point, we're going to have a 2. Second x, second y. So that's how we would label it. When we plug in our formula, it's going to be useful to realize that negatives in formulas are the same as saying use the opposite sign you start with. So I'll try to point out what I mean as we go. So we're going to try to remember to use the opposite sign we start with. So let's give an example here by using these 2 points. We have 3, 2. We can put 7, 8 first, it doesn't matter, but I'll put 7, 8 second. So the first thing will be to label it. First x, first y, and then second x and the second y. We're simply going to copy the square root sign, and we're going to input one at a time. So I like to get my square root sign ready and my squareds there and my parentheses, and then I want to just get ready to put in my x2 and x1. So first we're going to look at the x2, and I want to find it. It's right there. It's 7. Maybe I cross it out as I use it. So I'm going to put a 7. Then where it says minus in the formula, it means get the opposite sign of x1. So x1 is 3. I'm going to do negative 3 next to it. Then I'm going to find y2, which is the number 8, and I'm going to do a negative sign in the formula means the opposite sign of y1, minus 2 instead of positive 2. And I'm simply going to do these calculations. So 7 minus 3 is 4, and there's a squared. 8 minus 6 is 6. 8 minus 2 is 6 squared. So squared we had learned means 4 times 4, and 6 squared means 6 times 6. So squared means a number times itself. So 16 plus 36. And when we add those together, we get the square root of 52. Now your teacher might ask you to reduce that. That would be a different video I have on reducing square roots. Or you could use a calculator to find it as a decimal. So for finding perimeter or area, sometimes we'll do that. So I'll take 52, use the square root button, and I get 7.2 as my final answer. So let's take a look at what it looks like when we have some negatives mixed into our starting point. So let's give us 2 points. Maybe this one has a negative, this one doesn't. Maybe this one has a positive, and then a negative. So again, we want to, let me see if I have that saved. We want to remember the formula. There it is. And the first step is to label xy, xy. That's what every coordinate is. And then 1 for first point, and a 2 for second point, second point. We want to remember that in the formula, that negative sign is going to mean do the opposite of what you started with. So first we're going to start with x2. So x2 is the number here, 5. I'm going to put it into the formula. Then in the formula it says minus, which means opposite sign of x1. So x1 is negative 3. I'm going to do the opposite sign. Then I'm going to use y2, which is negative 2, and then plug in the opposite sign of x1. So I put in y2. Now I'm going to look for y1, but that negative in the formula means the opposite of what we started with, so -4 instead of positive. And I'm going to add and do our calculations. 5 plus 3 is 8 squared. -2 take away 4 is -6 squared. And we want to remember a negative times a negative becomes positive when you multiply. So when I do this, I'm going to get 64 plus -6 times -6, or positive 36. Because in geometry, we don't have negative distances. And so when we square a number, it actually will disappear. So 64 plus 36 is 100. Our final answer is the square root of 100, or 10. So it can be handy to think of when you fill in the formula, your negative sign is the same as saying the opposite of what you started with for x1 and the opposite of what you started with for y1, the opposite sign. And maybe that'll help some of you remember how to do it. Let's try one last example. You might, again, want to pause the video. You kind of want to do that when you're practicing and see if you could do it. And if not, it's very good for your brain to see if you could figure out what you did wrong along the way. That's critical thinking, to find your mistake, problem solving. So pause it and label it and plug it into the formula. And this will be x and y, first one. X and y, the second one. So first we're going to start with x2. That'll be the number -3. Cross it out. Then the formula says negative sign, which means opposite of x1. The opposite sign is -2. Because it starts positive, we change it to negative. Then we look for y2, which is 5. And we look at y1, which is going to be the opposite sign of -1, which is +1. Then from there, what we're going to do is we do our addition. -3 minus 2 is -5. And then 5 plus 1 is 6. And then we want to remember, anytime you square a number, it means a number times itself. -5 times -5. When you multiply a negative times a negative, it becomes +25 plus +36. And our final answer is going to be the square root of 61. So that is how we do the distance formula.